Hello, Widowhood. I am so excited about today's guest. Her name is Dr. Pamela Blair. She is a co author of two books. The first book, I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye, was something that a friend gave to me when my late husband, Mark, passed. And it literally was a lifeline of me trying to manage grief, to understand what was before me, and to grasp what I could do to help myself in the process. She has recently co-authored another book called The Long Grief Journey. And both of these books have their place in our life. The I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye is so vital in dealing with the loss of a loved one, and especially if they died unexpectedly. Her book has been one of the top sellers. It is a cornerstone in the process of dealing with grief. It was so helpful to guide people that were experienced the loss of a loved one during 9/11. And now, after just over 20 years of that book, realizing that people still need more because what happens after grief is still impacting us 2, 3, 20 years later. And society gives us it should have been done in 6 months. And how do we deal with that? Well, the long grief journey deals with so many parts of that. I want to give you a little bit about who our guest is. Miss Pamela Blair is an author, motivational speaker, historically trained psychotherapist. Pamela Blair is holistically trained and psychotherapist. She is a life coach, motivational speaker with a PhD from the American Institute of Holistic Theology. Pam has appeared in magazines, hundreds of shows, radio programs, including ABC World News, CNN Headline News, Fox and Friends, and film for television specials entitled Widowsville. She is the author of books for women, The Next 50 Years, a guide for women at midlife and beyond, and getting older and better. Pamela also co-authored the best-selling award-winning book of sudden loss and grief, I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye, Surviving, Coping, and Healing After the Sudden Death of a Loved One. She is currently retired, facilitating a group for women writers, mentoring in the school system, working on a novel, and living in Vermont with her husband and two cats. Pam is international bestseller whose books have been translated in multiple languages and looks for a new release of her co-authored book, The Long Grief Journey. You can find The Long Grief Journey actually on our website under resources. There's a link there to purchase it. Let's get into this conversation now.
Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, welcome Dr. Pamela Blair to the Widowhood.
Nice to be here, Tina. You're so much fun.
It is nice to have you here. I am just so grateful for your willingness to bring your expertise, unfortunately, based on your life experience and your many years of practice in serving other people. But I am sorry for the methodology that has brought you to this room, but I am so grateful for your willingness to be part of this conversation and to be here for the widowhood.
Well, I'm glad to be here 100%. So let's get started.
All righty. So for you that may not know, Dr. Pamela Blair has been one of the co-authors of I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye. And I have mentioned this book several times because someone provided it to me, and it was literally a lifeline. I know she's authored some other books, and we're going to get into those, but I think this was one of your first books in the grief arena. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about how this book came to be?
Okay. At the time, let's see, this was a year before 9/11. So what year was that, Tina? About
2010?
something like that. Yeah. Okay. And I was writing a newsletter for people who were going through divorce. My co-author, who happened to own a publishing company, contacted me and she said, you can write. If you can write about divorce, can you also write about, grief? And I said, it just so happens that I had a former husband who died suddenly. And yeah, I've learned a lot about grief personally, and I'd be delighted to co-author a book with you. So, and her reason for wanting to write the book was to honor her brother who died of anaphylactic shock from a bee sting. So the book was, we worked on the book together. And this was before there was a lot of remote stuff that you can do like we can today. So a lot of it went back and forth over landlines, where you had to listen for the sound. What's that called? The internet, whatever. And so that book was written in 20-minute segments because of a brain injury I sustained around the time I signed the contract for it. So I was nearly killed in a car accident. I had a brain injury, but I could only write for about 20 minutes at a time, and then I'd have to go to sleep. So that was a hard task, but the book got written in very slow increments, very thoughtful increments. And because of the book, I was given a PhD based on the research we did for it. And the rest is history. The book has been selling for about 21 years, I guess. It
Wow.
was, and I'll brag a bit. I'm delighted that it was used to comfort and guide the widows from 9/11, police officers and the firefighters, widows and widowers. So, yeah, I'm proud of the book. And I'm glad it helped you, Tina.
Thank you. I did not know the circumstances in which you endured to be committed. That just makes this even more powerful to think about what you were struggling with at that point in time and still being willing to make that sacrifice to help other people. Do you mind talking a little bit about the accident that took place?
Oh, Tina, I was sitting at a stoplight. I had just signed the contract to write. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I'm sitting at a stoplight. The weather's beautiful. The windows are open. I had just gotten back from the library. I had about 13 books on death and grieving in my back seat to do some more research. And somebody came out of nowhere, turned a corner really fast. It was a teenager, how they drive sometimes. And he hit me head on. I didn't, there was no blood or anything. It was a closed head traumatic brain injury. Because my head went back and forth like this in the
Mm.
car when I was hit, and I passed out and all that. And the first thing I said to the police officer who showed up at my window was, I can't remember what a 9 is. What's a 9? Because I was trying to call 911.
Mm.
And he said, don't worry about it. Everything's okay. And I said, yeah, but my death. And he said, you're not dead. But I was trying to do is form a sentence to say, my books on death, are they
Mm.
okay? I'm worried about my books. So it was a kind of a strange experience to have a brain injury and not really feel 100% in control of your brain. And that lasted for about 2.5 years of cognitive rehabilitation, where I had to learn to walk and talk again.
Wow.
So, because I had verbal aphasia, which means you have trouble finding words. To this day, I still have that problem. So I may ask you for words as we continue today. I write better than I talk
Okay.
sometimes.
Wow.
So just so you know about that, that's the underpinning of that book. Plus, of course, I lost George, and I say my former husband because we were separated at the time. He had a major brain aneurysm that he never recovered from.
Thank you for
So
mentioning, and
that was the second
I am
one.
sorry for your loss. And you mentioned something that you were separated, but that
Mhm.
doesn't decrease the separation of him dying and how it impacted your life. And I think that's important
Not
if
at
we could
all.
spend a little bit of time there because I've spoken with some people and they feel like, well, we were separated or we were in the process of getting a divorce. Do I have the right to still be sad or
Mm.
am I being over emotional? Would you mind speaking about that from your perspective and other people you've supported?
There's a word for it, and we wrote about it in The Long Grief Journey, which is the next book. It's called Disenfranchised Grief. In other words, where's the support group for people who are separated or divorced and their loved one dies? And I heard some very unhelpful words spoken during that time. Well, he cheated on you, and you're crying about him. Why are you crying about him? Well, I had children with him, 2 children, and I really was grieving with them over the loss of their father, and I needed to find a place to put that grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, fortunately, my sister could be the one who was doing that with me, but it's not fortunate. Her husband also died within 6 months of George of the same brain aneurysm in the same part of the brain. Very strange, sort of. Marilyn and I, who's my sister, we always felt like twins growing up. But to have twins whose husbands die in the same exact way, that's very weird. Anyway, so Marilyn was there to support me through it, and I supported her through it. And we drove around Canada. We took a trip to Canada to a remote area so we could scream and cry. Again, going back to the point where I was disenfranchised and not finding anybody else that I could grieve with and get support with, it was unfortunate that you know, I learned a lot from that time. In fact, in my grief group, which I run twice a month here in Shelburne, Vermont, was a man who came in last week who said, I don't know if I should be here. And I said, why? He said, because I'm going through a divorce and I'm grieving the divorce at the same time I'm grieving, the woman I was married to. I said, get in here and you sit down. You're in the right place.
Nice.
We've all got circumstances in our lives, and we need to be open and loving to folks.
How did you come about with the grief support group?
I'm a member of a community here called All Souls Interfaith Gathering. And you can call it a church if you want to, but I call it a gathering of like-minded people who are very interested in what the various cultural differences bring to the table in terms of religion. And my ordination was as an interfaith minister. And when I found this organization here, which happens to be 4 minutes from my house, which is fabulous, I became a member there, a supporting member. And I approached the lead pastor there and I said, hey, I think we need a grief support group because I've looked around. There are none in this area unless you want to travel 45 minutes.
Mm.
So he said, go for it, girlfriend, or something like that. He's a very cool guy. And I said, okay, I'm going to go for it. And I put the grief support group together. All I could really manage over there at that facility, because the rooms there are filled with therapists and all kinds of people who do healing, was twice a month. So they gave me the first and third Saturday of the month, and for an hour and a half. And I've learned a lot from the people who come from that support group, who come for that support group. It's a fact that even though I've written 2 books on grief, I'm still learning.
Mm. That says a lot. I appreciate you sharing that because sometimes, and you've probably heard this more often than not, that people feel like they've placed a time limit on their grief, that I have been grieving for 3 years, 5 years, 6, 15. I should be over this by now. I should be back to normal. I should not still be feeling this way. What do you say to people that bring that type of conversation to you, or those thoughts that are hovering in their mind?
The loss of a loved one lives on in you for the rest of your life. Okay. And it's up to the griever to figure out what the path is, hopefully with a supportive community of people, hopefully reading books to sort of clarify things like the long grief journey. I think the long grief journey includes maintaining a connection to your loved one in some way or another. I can't stress that strongly enough. In fact, for me, it's been, I always lose count, over 30 years since George died. I still talk to him. He's a great guardian angel. In fact, he sometimes finds me parking spaces. But mostly when it has to do with his son, he will just show up and give me a parking space outside of their home, or when I'm picking up my grandson, who is his son, I'll get a good parking space. So I enjoy the connection. At first, it was painful because I had a lot of unfinished business with him, right? So those communications with him resulted in tears and anger. But as the years went by, it changed little by little. And he's just a real good, comforting guardian angel at times when I need him. In fact, I get messages all the time. I don't know if your audience would appreciate this.
Oh, please share. Yes.
Okay. I'm a deeply spiritual person, and I've studied numerology, and I understand things that, one of my certificates is in metaphysics. I see the number 333 often when I need to see that number. And when I first saw that number show up on my clock radio in the middle of the night, I was annoyed. I was like, 333, what the heck does that mean? And it kept showing up. So I looked it up online, and it means that it's an angel number of some kind. I don't know the exact wording that goes with that. Maybe I wrote it down in my notes. But in any case, I decided it was George trying to get through with a message of some kind. So I see it. I see the 333 on license plates in front of me when I'm rushing to get to my grief group. Or a recent one was about 4 months ago. My grandson, his grandson, was in the hospital with that viral infection that children were getting.
RSV or
RSV. That's
okay.
Right. That's the one. And he was really in bad shape. And I was just, my heart was breaking. And I rushed into the, what was it? Was it the grocery store? I think it was the grocery store. And there was one of those displays out front talking about ice melter. It was an ice melter display. All right. And ice melter was on sale. I live in Vermont. Okay. Ice melter is very important. And there it was, the number, they were on sale for $3.33. And I thought, that's a strange number to have for a sale.
It is very odd.
Right? It's not $3.95 or $3.99.
Exactly.
333 for ice melter. And I thought, okay, that's George saying everything's going to be all right. That baby's going to be okay. And he ended up being okay. So I believe in those connections, those ongoing connections. Now, I'm remarried happily for many years. And I told that to my husband, and he said, go for it. If you want to, believe that. He's kind of, he's not quite with me on some of these metaphysical things. All right. And that's okay. He's got his journey as a United Methodist minister. All right.
Okay.
But I've got my journey as an interfaith minister and with a PhD in metaphysics and philosophy. So there we have it. I enjoy the connection. And he's not jealous about that.
That is beautiful.
He thinks it's weird, but he's not jealous.
I want to touch back and we did mention the first book, but the second book, The Long Grief Journey, thank you for bringing that into the conversation. And thank you for speaking about how you give permission for people to redevelop what that grief looks like over time. And I do want to share that Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, our private Facebook group, we actually are now doing a book club on the long grief journey. We are doing,
cool.
Yep, we're doing 3 chapters a month. On the third Saturday of a month, we meet at 10 a.m. on Zoom. And we just had our first meeting last Saturday and just spoke about the first 3 chapters in here. Now, if I understand correctly, the 2 books that you have, I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Obviously, anyone can read them, but that first book is geared towards someone that has recently lost a loved one. And
suddenly.
And you talk about so many different ways about what to prepare that first week. And then different people are telling their journey as far as who they lost. And then you dive into what that looks like. And then there was a companion workbook to that first book. Now I see with the long grief journey, if I understand that correctly, it's geared towards someone that has been grieving sometime longer. Not just, it's not like it's a year snap, you need the long grief journey, but you give some explanation as far as why some things you can look introspectively, why you feel like this would be good for you. And then it also sort of has workbook components inside of this book. If I see this title and it resonates with me, what should I start thinking about why this would be good for me to read?
Well, let me just say, and my publisher, who and that Source Books Random House, came up with putting the word mental health on the cover. I didn't 100% agree with that. My co-author did. So the subtitle is How Long-Term Unresolved Grief Can Affect Your Mental Health and What to Do About It. So we talk about what are the different aspects of mental health that the long grief journey can trigger. And my co-author loves to do research. I like to talk. All right. So you'll find talking in the long grief journey, and then you'll find intense research by Brady Hansen, my co-author. And we were the perfect marriage to do this book. Now I've forgotten the question you asked.
If I'm listening to this podcast and I see this book, what about this book would make me feel like that I need to read it?
That you need to read it. Okay.
Or how it can help me.
There are cultural expectations that somebody, get over their grief after a certain period of time. Gee whiz, it's been 2 years. When are you going to get over it and start dating again? Or, some of the things that people say, they're trying to be helpful. They may be well-meaning, but that's annoying because for some people, it lasts much longer. And I think grief lasts until you're done. However, that the intense grief, all right? However, some people get stuck. And that's why I wanted the long grief journey to be written. The first time I ran it by my publisher, she said, "Oh, no, we're not going to publish that. It'll compete with I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye." And I had to hold my tongue for a minute. I hope she's not going to listen to this. I had to hold my tongue for a minute because I said, did you read it? Did you read the Long Grief Journey manuscript? It's totally different. It's in some aspects the same, but this is different. This is about the long journey. And I've been on a long journey. It didn't affect my mental health poorly. Although there were days when I was very depressed, even 3 or 4 years after, because things were happening in my son's life that I wish his father was here for, So it triggered some grief, depression grief. All right. So we try to clarify what that difference is between intense depression that needs a mental health professional to intervene, and what is just kind of normal, getting triggered by hearing your loved one's favorite song, and having a temporary bout of grief. I really wanted the publisher to understand that this was a different book, because the grief journey is long and it can last the rest of your life. If you're grieving the loss of a child, for instance, that doesn't end. And I don't think grief ends, quite honestly. It changes over time.
I would agree.
All right. So that's what the long grief journey is mostly about. She finally did read the manuscript the way I wanted her to read it, more intensely, more in depth. And she said, "Oh yeah, we got to publish this one."
I like in chapter 2, and I like that you that you ladies brought this into the book very early in chapter 2, when it talks about understanding the emotional and physical effects of long-term grief.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah.
There are so many different ways. And I think we hear the word grief and people just want to instantly say denial, rejection, and have this very short circle and check it off. I've gone through that cycle. I'm done grieving. The box is checked and let's go get on with life. I don't think that that's how it really works. What would you say if someone says, I've been through the first year of grieving, I'm going back to work, I'm doing stuff, but there are times that I'm just incapacitated. I'm emotionally distracted. I really can't move on. And I just don't want to keep talking about death anymore, but I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I want to examine with you, you well know the grief model that Kubler-Ross presented in her work. Of course, it's totally misunderstood because that was meant to be what someone who's dying goes through in terms of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally acceptance. Okay. Well, you're going back to work, you're trying to function pretty well, but you get ambushed somehow by grief. Like I said, it could be a bird song, or it could be a smell. You could smell muffins cooking in the kitchen at your job or something, and that was your loved one's favorite thing to eat or something. You can be triggered in the most unusual ways. Compassion is very important. Compassion for yourself. To judge that as wrong or bad, or why did that happen? That shouldn't be happening, is not very loving to yourself. So you've got to look at your self-talk at these times and do what you can to soothe yourself. We all have an inner child. It could be 5 years old inside of us that runs around, gets us in trouble, or it could be a teenager that's in there, or a young adult woman. But there's an inner somebody in there who needs your attention and compassion. And if you need to go for a walk, tell your boss, I need to go for a walk for 15 minutes. I'll be back. Or you say, I'm going to the bathroom, and you sit in the stall and cry. Do it. Why stuff it? If you've got these emotions coming up, you got to give yourself some compassion and let the people around you know that you need a break once in a while. Right?
That is so true. Thank you for mentioning the idea of just sometimes we give other people more permission to be upset, to be emotional, and then we don't give our own selves that same permission to realize this is a process. And thank you for expounding on Kubler-Ross's process, because a lot of people hear those steps and feel like, once I've done that, I've grieved. And even when I hear people talk about that, it's not a circle that's very neat. It is different things you will feel back and forth and around it in the process of living and doing that. And you mentioned 30 years, and still there are moments where grief still ambushes you.
Well, Kubler-Ross's last stage is acceptance, right? Do we ever get acceptance about the loss of our loved one? And we say, oh, that was fine. He's dead. That's okay. No, it's not okay. Those stages that she talks about, denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, can all happen within 1 hour of each other.
Yes. Yes.
So when you talk about that circle, yeah, it's a crazy whirlwind. So learning how to manage it and offer ourselves compassion and understanding of the grief process is number one important.
Yes. On the 17th of May would have been wedding anniversary with my late husband.
Mm-hmm.
And the unsmart part about it was the 16th of May is my birthday. We thought that was really cute when we were young and got married. Didn't really think about the long game of that. I would say in the last 2 years, I've been able to be excited about my birthday. But almost just as the day is ending, my mind is in a tizzy thinking about the next day that would have been our anniversary. Well, still our anniversary, but there's nothing to count anymore to me. There's nothing to say we would have been married XYZ. It was 29 years when he passed. So he passed in March. I gave myself for 30 in May. But to count that going forward caused so much pain. And the emotional distraction, the heaviness that comes, but giving myself grace to say, it's okay, that there's nothing to fight about this. It is the reality of loving him and how it shows up in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Before, when it happened, I tried to maybe run away from it, but now I'm trying to learn to lean into it, clear my schedule, do some of those self-help things, and just say, okay, let's just deal with this because it's here.
Leaning into it. I like the way you put that. That's perfect, because that almost feels like a physical gesture moving forward. But as you lean into it, you're also moving forward with your life. And it seems you've done that. Will you ever get to acceptance? I don't think so. I don't think I will. But leaning into it, that's beautiful. Thank you
So
for
when I
using
heard the word acceptance, I thought no more playing mind games with myself that they're not really no longer on this earth. Will I ever be thrilled, or like will acceptance ever equal that I'm fine with? I think I'll forever be like low key, like, no, I really wasn't glad that was a thing.
Yeah.
Learning to have a life that I enjoy. Yes. As you mentioned yourself, but if acceptance would equal satisfaction or happiness, I don't know if that, no, I don't see that ever being something that I would look at and say in connection to that would be, yeah, that'd be inconceivable for me. In looking at, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. The only time acceptance, I think it might be the right word, is in a sudden loss, for instance. If somebody keeps saying, oh, he'll be home anytime, and you say, no, he died in the Twin Towers, and he's not going to come home. Oh, yes, he will. That kind of denial, strong denial, and not accepting the fact that the person is dead. That we move into, after a while, if it keeps going, we move into where we need an intervention by a mental health professional to get that person to accept the fact that their loved one is dead. But that's the only time I would ever use that word. In fact, I don't like it at all, the word acceptance.
I can agree with that.
As it relates to grief. Yeah.
My late husband, we were on vacation. He had a massive heart attack. We were together for like a 3-day weekend, and we got together Friday, Saturday. He was no longer here by 7 p.m. And I remember friends picking me up and driving me home, driving his car. Mark lived in Virginia. I was still in Pennsylvania. We met in Maryland to connect for the weekend. And I am devastated that it happened. But at the same time, I'm so grateful that I was there, because we all have a point in time when we leave this world. And I'm glad he wasn't in that 1 bedroom apartment in Virginia by himself, but we were together. When you spoke about acceptance, it made me remember and I was in the bathroom and I opened up the top drawer, which was his belongings in the bathroom. And I just stared at them. And my mind quickly wanted to say, well, he's in Virginia. And when he comes home, he'll get those things out the
Yeah.
drawer and clean them up. That was
Yeah.
my instant thought. But my second thought was, we need to clean out that drawer, because I cannot keep doing that thought to myself. And it was because this stuff only happens like at 2 a.m., the most random time. And I'm literally cleaning that drawer out, getting rid of different things, because I needed to see that empty drawer to remind me of the reality of the situation.
Yep. You know what you did, Tina, is very valuable for other people to hear, and that is, we do what we need to do when the time is right for us, not when Uncle Joe or your sister Mary says, all right, when are you going to clean out that drawer? All right. No, you did it when you felt you needed to do it, because it moved you in a not healthy direction, is what you're saying. It triggered you.
Yes.
And that one drawer was what you needed to do. And we deal with a whole chapter on what do we do with our loved ones' belongings in here. Some people, I have somebody in the grief group, Tina, who lost a child, and they still have the bedroom set up, and it's 10 years. Yeah, with the baby's name over the crib and the whole thing. And he's coming because he doesn't know how to get his wife to move forward, you know?
When people hear the word move forward, it elicits different things in different people. What have you found with that term?
Yeah. Or move on.
Yes.
Word. Yes. We're allowed to respond to somebody who says it's time for you to move forward by saying, I will when I'm ready. All right. And that's what I told this man about his wife. I said, is she living her life otherwise? You know, going shopping and going to work and living her life. He said, yeah, but that symbol of that room is still there, you know? And I said, well, if it's bothering you and you're in a loving relationship, then perhaps you need to negotiate something with your wife about what to do with the child's belongings. Perhaps take pictures of the room, and then decide what the room is going to become. They need the space in their house. They really
Right.
do. She needs a home office now. She's working from home and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm still learning about how people manage deep loss and the loss of a loved one. And I think the way to sit with somebody who's going through that kind of thing is to just drop down right into your heart with a deep compassion for them, so they can learn compassion for themselves. And yes, the long grief journey, and also I wasn't ready to say goodbye, is full of ideas of things you can do. And none of them may work. How about that?
That is so true.
How about the author saying, what I wrote may not work for you?
But it's because everybody's different.
That's right.
Every individual is unique, and also their loss is unique. Just because two people have lost a spouse, and doesn't mean that they're having the same experience. It's so dependent upon those people and their individual relationships and what that looks like. But what I do believe both your books do, they give you an insight to the process. It gives you an opportunity to understand what grief looks like, to be able to read it, whether I'm the person grieving, to say, I am not alone. There is someone that understands what I'm going through. And if it's
And
someone trying to help someone, to give them insight on how to be there for that person they're supporting.
and 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 I'm not crazy. I tell a story about when my sister went to a psychiatrist because her grief was extremely intense when her husband died, and she knew that the psychiatrist's wife had also died. And she said to him, "Doctor, how did you get through this intense grief?" And he leaned forward in his chair and he said, "I went crazy," which validated for her that yes, there's a crazy time, especially in the early stages, and it may continue for a couple of years, craziness coming and going, you know.
Thank you for mentioning that, because those are things people say very hushly. Like they don't want that to be in their outside voice, that someone's ever heard that.
Mm.
I can definitely relate. I was concerned about if I would lose myself in that crazy. And I feel like that's why some people don't want to, they want to try to avoid the grief. They want to try to act like those feelings aren't happening. They want to act like they're not having this discomfort, this pain. But I feel like that double energy doesn't serve them well, because to learn to heal, at some point you do have to lean into it,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your process may look like. But you do have to lean into this. And the long grief journey does a really good job of helping you travel through that process. And how did you ladies come up with the idea to incorporate the questions and to sort of help someone dig from themselves as they were reading the book? Why was it just not a book, but you did them together?
I wanted the reader to feel like I was sitting there asking the questions. I wanted it to be more conversational, and I had to keep telling my co-author, who I was delighted to have found to work with me, come on, loosen up a little bit, because she loves research and statistics and yada yada. I said, make it more conversational. Let's ask questions. Let's ask the questions that the grieving person might be asking, and see how that works in terms of format. So that's how that came about. I just gave, like I said, this class for spiritual direction at All Souls here, and I started out by asking them. I gave them out an index card, and I said, on one side, I want you to write down what somebody has said to you while you were grieving, what was unhelpful, on one side of the card. And I gave them 5 minutes to do that and think about what was said to them that was unhelpful. And on the other side, to write down what was helpful that they heard somebody say, or that they were something that was offered to them that was helpful. Well, on the unhelpful side, and I lost my notes of what they all said, but I do remember a few of them. And one of the women said, the most unhelpful thing that somebody said to me was, I know just how you feel. Mm-mm. No. Mm-mm. Now, it's well-meaning, because they're trying to let you know that you're not alone in the journey in some way. But you had a reaction to that, didn't you?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that one we need to take out of our vocabulary, our the way we talk to people in grief. And the most helpful thing I heard was a sense of community, a sense of having one or two other people that they could be with and cry with. One of the most beautiful things I found to put in I wasn't ready to say goodbye, was a poem written by a Molly Fumia. And she wrote, I'll cry with you, she whispered, until we run out of tears.
Mm.
Even if it's forever, we'll do it together. There it was, a simple promise of connection, the loving alliance of grief and hope that blesses both our breaking apart and our coming together again. I'll cry with you. That's pretty cool. And I don't know if I answered this most recent question, but one of the other things that I heard from the talk I gave was having somebody to cry with you, finding the right person that's willing to just sit there, and if they get tears in their eyes, fine, but you'll be able to feel they're crying, even if it's within.
Hmm. That is so true. I, the value in just sitting with someone, when you mentioned that, people feel as if they have to come with all the answers. They have to come with the correct words of encouragement. They need to come prepared to make this better. And the reality is, they cannot. But what you can do is sit with someone,
Yes.
and sometimes just being quiet and just being present and consistently showing up. Because I know I've spoken to some people, like somebody may show up one time, but that person that stays 2, 3, 4 months, you start becoming comfortable enough to be transparent and to show them what you're dealing with that you'll show no one else. And they start, to me, sort of carrying some of that burden with you, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not alone anymore in doing that. And the relationships that are built in that process are amazing.
What I do at the end of the grief group, Tina, is we usually have about 12 people who come, right? We form a circle. I say, just hold hands, okay? And close your eyes if you want to. And what I say is, we are grateful for the hand that is holding ours. We send up a prayer of gratitude for the fact that we are not alone on this journey. And that means a lot. Even if you come to a grief group or you attend one and you never talk and you just sit there and listen to others' stories and cry with them, that's enough. That sense of community, I must have said it 12 times now in this podcast already, but it's really important. And so that was one of the things that somebody said was most helpful, was having somebody to cry with. Somebody wrote getting food, which is great. There were all kinds of suggestions in that group. So Tina, I can't tell you how grateful I am for people like you who are putting it out there and being supportive. How many people do you say you reach? Like thousands of people across the world?
Sue, at this point, Widowhood Real Talk with Tina Beach. So we have social content that we put out across 5 different social medias and our podcast. At this point, we try to take the analytics at the end of every month. We've connected with over 651,000 people in 20 countries.
Wow.
And it has been amazing. I'm not sure if I'm sure it's a combination of, one, we as a world are coming out of a global pandemic where people have lost so many loved ones, and they've had to do it confined in their own home. So as we're putting information out on social media, whether it's a 1 minute inspirational, we do something every Wednesday called a widowhood tip. We do snippets of the podcast that's put out weekly, and then the weekly podcast that comes out on our website or across 15 different podcasting, to give people space to go, there is a community for me. Some people are making Widowhood Real Talk with Tina their community, whether they're connecting with us on Instagram, and for people to say, I lost my daughter, I lost my husband, I lost my wife, and to be able to share, to be able to message, to be able, Because sometimes it may be easier to connect when you can't see me typing those words through tears and disappointment and hurt and anger, but knowing that I am not alone in that process. When you said community, it just resonated so much because when we know we're not alone in doing this, it doesn't change that my loved one died, but it does change that there's someone going through this with me. As you were speaking, I was looking at chapter 10 of The Long Grief Journey. And I was just going to read what was there by Helen Keller, and you read something very similar to that out of I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye, where it says, we
What
breathe.
page you on? What page you on?
Page 124.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
It says, we bereaved are not alone. We belong to the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering. Helen Keller, activist and author of We Bereaved. It is amazing to me how we are all impacted by death, but we don't talk about it.
Well, you are. I am right now. And I think back in the day, I guess my Mother's Day, maybe your Mother's Day. I'm going to be 75 in a couple of weeks. I can't believe that.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Children weren't even allowed, or young adults weren't even allowed. No, children weren't allowed to go to funerals because it would be too upsetting for them, they thought. People were expected to get over grief if they were working a job within 3 days. It was actually written into the Bible, if you will, of their particular of various companies. That, you get 3 days of bereavement and that's it. You better come back to your job and you better be okay about that. Well, nobody's okay after 3 days. And so we're talking more and more about grief in this world. I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye is a bestseller in grief because it's just laying it out there as the reality that we as human beings, we're going to have to deal with at some point in our lives. I told my daughter, I said, have you read I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye yet, or the Long Grief Journey? I said, because I'm going to die someday. And I want you to be prepared. You'll hear my words in that book, and hopefully it'll be supportive to you,
Reading this book, or I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye, how would you see that differently from someone that's been impacted by grief or someone that hasn't, and they picked this book up to read it?
They're going to learn about how to support somebody in their community or in their life to get through it. In fact, I came up with a list of ways to be supportive to somebody who's grieving. And I don't even remember which book it's in. It might be in both. Oh, yeah, there's a whole chapter on how to support somebody in the long grief journey. And then there's a list that you can photocopy if you are grieving. And, I wrote this book and I can't find half of the things I wrote, but it's in there, which you can photocopy and give to people in your space on how to handle you. It's in the I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye. And we give permission.
Yeah, here on page 107 talks about grief and developmental stages in helping with a child and what that looks like. I highly recommend, and let me say, not only do we highly recommend, but I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye is one of the books that Widowhood Real Talk with Tina gives to people for free. Part of our mission that when someone is grieving and they're connected to me, we will mail this book out to them immediately because it is literally such a foundational book and step by step, like you said, just putting it out there because we are all impacted by grief, and we
Yes.
need some guidance. Everyone doesn't have maybe the means to have a therapist or have insurance or have the ability to connect, but yet needing guidance and not trying to manage this alone and needing direction. I wasn't ready to say goodbye is an excellent source to be able to do that. And as I'm going through the long grief journey, because as you said in the beginning, two things I wanted to tap on before we wrapped up. You
Okay.
talked about the cultural differences, and then also you
Yes.
yourself in this for 30 years. Can you speak a little bit about the cultural differences that you found as far as people grieving?
The cultural differences are really tied at times like this when we're grieving to religion, or your spiritual belief.
Okay.
So in Christianity, you've got scripture that offers some comfort, support, and guidance to those who need comfort, knowing their loved one's existence continues beyond the physical life. Okay, so that's Christianity, and there's more to that. And support happens through prayer, the congregation, certain customs and death rituals. And then there's Islam, with the griever is encouraged to openly cry at the time of death, during the funeral, during the burial. There's no, holding your hands like this. No, there's open grieving in Islam, openly displayed grieving, and certain things like the religion mandates and prohibits the person from dressing in decorative clothing or jewelry during the time of grief, things like that. Then there's Buddhism, and Buddhists believe in reincarnation and that there's life after death. And the teachings hold that nothing in this physical world is permanent. And so that's a way for Buddhists to begin to understand what happens in terms of grief. Judaism, of course, there's different ones. There's Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and each one of them has a different pathway through grief that we need to understand and value. And Hinduism, when a person dies, there's again, there's the reincarnation part of that, that the soul lives on in a constant cycle of rebirth. So it behooves us as human beings on the path of this life to understand that there are cultural differences. You can speak to some of the racial differences, perhaps. I can't, but even in Christianity, there's some wonderful differences. Some that are kind of restrictive, but some wonderful ones, celebratory ones. When we were in Africa, my husband and I, he was down there checking on missionary work, making sure the money's going where it's supposed to go. And we had a beautiful ceremony underneath a tree where someone was grieving because they didn't have a church, because they just didn't have the money for it. So that we were under a tree, and we embraced this woman who was grieving very openly. And the community just gathered around her and hugged her and lifted her up and carried her around. I mean, it was one of the most beautiful ceremonies I'd ever seen. And it was a Christian ceremony, but it was really so different from when I came back to the United States and people are just sitting all proper in church. No, I really enjoyed the one in Africa. And then we were also in New Zealand, and we saw how the Maori handle their grief, and it's quite similar. It's really a very beautiful thing. There's a lot of dancing and yelling. There's all kinds of cultural differences, but here in the U.S., yeah, you're going to find some interesting things going on. I don't judge any of them. Whatever the path is, go for it.
Thank you. The idea of you mentioned something that's the beautiful ceremony, and I heard also the community coming to supporting her. I have spoken to people that some of the most beautiful outpouring of love and support has been during the process of them healing and grieving a loved one's loss. That the ability for people to show up in your life is amazing in ways that I don't think would have happened any other way. That we would connect and be available to people to support us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's a club that you join.
On page 278 of The Long Grief Journey, it talks about walking toward a new day.
Yes.
Cry out. Don't be stolid and silent with your pain. Lament and let the milk of loving flow into you. The hard rain and wind are always the cloud has take care of us. Be patient. Respond to every call that excites your spirit. Ignore those that make you fearful and sad that degrade you back towards disease and death. The idea of walking toward a new day can be so hard when you're grieving.
It sure is. And but we do wake up every morning and that sun rises. And to me, the sunrise, it represents hope. I also wrote a poem in the Long Grief Journey, and I'd like, if I can, to end with it. It's called A New Day.
Oh, we are so on tone with each other.
Yeah, we are. We get along pretty good. It's called A New Day. It's on page 288 in the Long Grief Journey. A new day happens unannounced, begins the unending loss and gain, with cries, with pain, asking to bend, breaking us open, heartache unspoken, screaming the unanswerable, inviting us, come this way. We walk in darkness toward the light of hope from hopelessness. A new day awaits. And sometimes it shows up completely unannounced. And we sit there and we go, wow, today I wasn't in pain today. And I had a woman in the grief group last week say, I feel guilty because I'm having a good day. And I said, then have it. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You might be, back in the saddle of grief again. But don't feel guilty. If a new day happens to show up and the sun rises and you're feeling good, that's okay.
Those are very good words. And I do believe, and I know for myself, that the information that you're providing does help someone look towards a new day. It does help those that are stuck become unstuck and helps people to find their own way. They may read both books and still come up with a different pattern of dealing with their grief. But what the books do is inspires each person that is grieving to have hope and to develop their new day and look towards that. Two questions I have for you before we wrap up. What gives you hope today, Pamela Blair?
My grandson. He's just a little boy. He's not even 3 years old yet. And I see a light in his eyes that reminds me of his grandfather who's passed. That gives me hope because life does continue. What also gives me hope is my garden. I put in those ugly looking bulbs, in the fall, and I think, oh, well, that's never going to grow. And you stick them in the ground and you walk away. And then in the spring, they come up. How does that happen? Well, it just does. I don't know. There's some sort of miracles all around us all the time. And that gives me hope.
Nice. Second question. What would you tell your younger self? And you get any age to pick to talk to her. And what would you tell her?
Oh, Tina, that's a good question. I'd say be more compassionate with yourself, Pam. That's what I'd say. I'd say drop your judgments, Don't be so harsh on yourself when you don't do things correctly, or you grieve too much or too little. Just just live and stop the judgment. Period. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pam, for this conversation. Thank you for joining the Widowhood. If someone was interested in reaching out to you, how would they connect with you?
I have a website. It's called PamBlairBooks.com, www.pamblairbooks.com. And there's a way to communicate with me through that website. I'm retired as a psychotherapist, so I can't offer that service, but I'm there if you want to chat. It's okay.
Okay. And how does one register or enroll or I know you have to be local for your grief group, but how do they connect with you if they're in your area for that?
Through the All Souls Interfaith Gathering website.
Okay.
So that's All Souls Gathering, interfaithgathering.org. And there's a click button there, and it doesn't cost anything. We might ask for a donation. In fact, I usually do, and people are very kind. They do donate, whatever little you have. And that's it. And here I am trying to help people still at 75 years old almost.
And doing a fantastic job. Any closing remarks or anything else you want to cover that we didn't mention before?
No, you're really a good interviewer. And I just want to say thank you again for doing what you do, Tina.
Thank you. I am just thrilled. I know we're still talking about grief, but to be able to connect with someone that knows so much and can help so many people is exciting, because grief is hard. Grief is difficult. But you know what? There's hope. There is ability for you to connect with community. And Pamela mentioned that so many times, the importance of community, which just confirmed to me that what we are doing with the widowhood is important. The more you know that you are not alone, the more encouraged that you are, and the more you are inspired to walk your journey of grief and find the way that works for you and to continue to look towards a new day. I am sorry for the person that you lost and why you're part of this conversation, but I'm glad that you've decided to let us be a part of your journey. Thanks for being here. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.